While looking at the 2020 election, one of the most startling discoveries was that people who sold their homes and moved out of the state were actually still voting from their Florida residences. So Kris Jurski created the People's Audit to help Florida citizens check who's voting from their homes. But since 2024, he's joined forces with Eagle AI, a firm, to build a new system called Ellie, E-L-L-Y, that currently monitors 46 states and D.C. Kris Jurski, welcome into the Stone Zone.
Thanks for having me back.
So, Kris, how do you feel about the president's address the other night, and what are the implications?
Well, much like you and some of the other people that fought all the way through 2020, and especially some of the people that went up to Washington for January 6th, I feel vindicated to at least be that it's been addressed. But just like you said earlier, we're still hopeful and waiting for the arrest, because there is no real solutions until people go to jail and are punished for what they did here. And the other thing is the systems themselves. The systems are all still in place. So exactly what we had in 2020 is still, all that entire regime is still in place.
That is precisely my concern. I mean, first of all, I am astounded by the mainstream media and their Democratic handmaidens' ability to continue to say, with a straight face, that there's no evidence whatsoever of election irregularities, no evidence of voter fraud, no evidence of ballot fraud, no evidence of problems with paper ballots, mail-in ballots, no problems with the machine, and that if you say otherwise, you're some kind of a dangerous nut, even though, of course, you have a First Amendment right to say exactly that. What I've seen, I think you would agree with this, is overwhelming evidence of irregularities. Let's try to take this apart. Where is the greatest danger here? Is it in the voter lists? Is it in the manipulability and instability and insecurity of the machines? Or is it in the mail-in ballots? Or is it all three?
It's all of the above. And also I would add to that is the political machinery that sets themselves up. You probably know about a lot of the grassroots being squeezed out of the local politics in Florida. That's one of the oldest ways of basically pushing and manipulating politics. But I think the biggest part of the fuel that goes into the steel starts with the voter rolls, and it ends up with mail-in ballots mostly. They can generate as many voters as they need, and then with mail-in ballots, send those votes in.
So how do we fix our voter lists? So let's start there.
The biggest thing is that there's laws already on the books. NVRA, which stands for the National Voter Registration Act, that was created in 1993. This was long before the machines came along. Was clear in black and white that the citizens, the voter rolls belong to the citizens, and that the locals have a duty to make sure that the voter rolls are cleaned of what's very important, ineligible voters. A lot of the problems we have now with most of these states, because I monitor changes month to month, is they're not removing anybody. Most of the time, they basically just go ahead and mark people as inactive, and then they keep them on the voter rolls, and it's kind of like fuel that whenever they need to have an extra vote, they have this pool of people that they can pull from, either be it real or people that have moved out of state or died. The reality is that there's just a number of ways that they could reach in and grab these voters and then basically set them as a mail-in ballot. And it's happened over and over again. People show up at the polls and they're being told at the polls that they've already voted when they have no idea what they're talking about. So essentially mail-in ballots are coming in for these people when they're not paying attention and voting on their behalf.
So how do we fix this?
One of the things we did was we built a system called Ellie that is going through and following NVRA, that law, to a T, essentially using the tools that they outlined in 1994 of how to clean the voter rolls. But it goes far beyond that. Really, it's basically citizen involvement. We've seen the biggest tides turn when citizens and the grassroots get involved. And our system is designed to have volunteers come in and basically give them the opportunity to look over their local voter rolls and find issues and bring those to their local officials. And I think that's really what was the model in Florida. We removed like 2 million voters out of the voter rolls between 2024 and 2025, and a grand majority of those just happened to be Democrat. It wasn't like we were looking for them. But the biggest problems we had in Florida were like apartment complexes and things like that, where people moved out and basically were already living in another state, just they were never removed from the voter rolls. But it goes more than that. I mean, ultimately, we have to get back to a paper ballot and basically a hand-counted paper ballot at the local station. That, I think, is going to be the ultimate solution. The voter rolls are just the first start of it, and the voter rolls are ongoing throughout the entire year, whereas our elections just happen on that, hopefully one day, instead of like in California for an entire month.
Yeah, I want to ask you what you thought of that Los Angeles election, because it seemed to me, look, I'm not a mathematician, but it seemed to me that these late arriving ballots defied mathematical probability when they went 80% for the candidate who was on election night was running third and a poor third. She even conceded. And then suddenly there's, in the days afterwards, there's a spurt of thousands of new ballots. And there's two Democrats in the race. Remember, they have this jungle primary system in which any candidate of any party runs in one election. So you have multiple Democrats. In this case, I think you also had multiple Republicans, but one principal Republican. Then you see this influx of ballots that defy mathematical probability, but we both know nothing will be done about that, will it?
Well, I mean, the people keep on waking up and seeing it. I think that where we started in 2020, especially in Florida, when we said that the voter or the elections were rigged here, they kind of laughed it off. But after Kerry Lake and what's name the Los Angeles election you're talking about, more and more people are realizing that the game is fixed, and especially with these late count votes, that's the most obvious, where they just count until they get the right count, and then the election's called. But that's the whole thing. Like, we call it that F curve that is famous for the 2020 election, that Biden had 80 million votes come out of just nowhere at the last minute. And as you said, that the grand majority of the last remaining votes were all for Biden. If you do anything in math or statistics, they usually can, that's how they do typical polling, is they could figure out like where the election is going by basically doing sample sizes. And those samples stay pretty close to one another. It's very strange and absolutely suspicious when you see a large number of votes towards one candidate come all in at the last minute. It doesn't make any logical sense.
If you really want to see a Democrat or a liberal go out of their mind, suggest to them that the computerized voting machines are less than perfect, that they're insecure, that they can be hacked, that the numbers can be manipulated. I've seen online, as you have, and sometimes in person, overwhelming evidence of it. But once again, if you have the audacity to say that in public, you'll find yourself very quickly canceled. You'll find yourself, like me, no longer allowed to be on Facebook, no longer allowed to be on Instagram, no longer allowed to be on YouTube. They take your voice if you merely ask questions. But address for us, if you will, your view of these electronic voting machines and the level of security.
The biggest thing is anything that's digital can be fabricated. It's essentially like why you go buy a house. You have to show up and actually sign your documents in person with a notary. You can imagine that as soon as you walked out of that building, if it was a digitized contract, they could change anything they want, including the interest rate or whatever. That's why we, as a normal civil society, have been using paper documentation with signatures and witnesses for centuries as the actual physical presence of you basically being there and voting. Anything can be happening with these voter machines. They can change who's voting. They can change as many people as they want. They can change the results at the last minute. They can actually make it as much as an audit-proof seal as possible, because when you're looking through the digital records, it will appear that those ballots are there. We've even had situations in Georgia where they went through and they found duplicated images and fabricated images where the ovals were filled in and pressed in for different candidates. And unless you're looking at a piece of paper, when you're physically holding a piece of paper, you could probably get the sense that something's wrong, especially if you see like a flat oval. It looks more like something printed at. But whenever a human touches a piece of paper, there's usually an imprint when they're physically filling in an oval. So it's just much like your fingerprint. That's why it's very hard to cheat at scale if they tried to basically have a hand-counted paper ballot. That would put that all to rest, because at the local level, you might hear every small races where they still do that, and just like they did back in New York, Tammany Hall is much famous for that. But it would go a long way to stopping people stealing a governor's race, a senator's race, a presidency, things like that. You can cheat at scale now when it's all digital.
You're exactly right. I remember a couple of years ago when I went to vote, the person in line in front of me, let's call him John Smith, presented photo ID, a driver's license, and stated his address. And the clerk behind the desk, who's a day worker, said, "Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Smith, you voted this morning." He said, "No, I haven't." He said, "Yes, you definitely voted this morning." And he said, "Let me ask you a question. Is there also an Alma Smith registered at the same address as I am?" She looked at the voter rolls and she said, "Yes, she voted also." He said, "Well, that's my mother. She's been dead for 15 years, so she could not possibly vote." In the end, they let him cast a provisional ballot. Who knows whatever happened to it? I doubt it was counted. I got a text from a woman after yesterday's show who sent me a video of she and others presenting 43,000 affidavits from people in Arizona, all of whom had gone to vote, all of whom had shown up at a polling place, all of whom had been told they had already voted. In this case, the governor, Kemp, rather than accept this, slipped out the back door of the building. So this is an enormous ongoing problem. And I'm not optimistic about 2026. I wish I was, but as you correctly point out, although I think we've identified the problems don't seem to have been fixed. Federalizing our elections is not the answer. It's interesting. No. That's what the Democrats wanted to do, and House Bill 1, Senate Bill 1. They wanted to federalize the elections. I still think it's best that states regulate their own elections. But the idea that Florida is the gold standard of elections, that's what the governor told us. If you live in Broward County, that's a pretty laughable statement.
Yeah. Yes, it is. Yeah, I mean, that's probably the biggest thing is, especially when it's digital, you can imagine, like, as we watch anything from stock trading or anything else, that information is instantly available anywhere in the world. So they could steal anything from a sheriff's race all the way up to the presidency, and they don't even need to be in the country because they could be watching it from a dashboard thousands of miles away and manipulating our final results. And that's what's so infuriating about all of it, because essentially you would think that our local officials and especially our parties would want to support our local people. But it seems like the internationalists, the globalists have basically just bought them out because they don't have any. We've been pushed back ever since the very beginning, trying to fix stuff in Florida as well as other states to get any meaningful change. We've had a couple small things cleaning things up here and there, but again, the biggest thing I see is the fraud that's with the mail-in ballots and the machines.
I've taken the view that they use the machines to determine the results. Then they determine based on that how many votes they need. Then they just create those ballots based on names on the voter rolls of people who either never really existed, no longer exist, or have moved out of state or passed away. I think that's exactly the game that's being played. So you can't point to any one piece of this. It's not just the voter rolls. It's not just the mail-in ballots. It's not just the absentees. It's not just the machines. It's all of those things. Seems to me that they all need to be fixed. Folks, if you're just tuning in, we're talking to Kris Jurski with the People's Audit, and we're talking about whether the 2026 elections can be free, fair, and honest. Kris has done amazing work here in the Sunshine State of Florida to try to work for clean, fair, honest elections. Now he's working with Eagle AI, a firm building a system called Ellie that currently monitors the elections in 46 states and the District of Columbia. Kris, tell us about Ellie and what you're doing there.
Yeah, I'm really excited about Ellie because Ellie is probably the first of its kind that will follow NIVRA, which is the National Registrations Voter Registration Act of 1993 to the T. It's really the only federally backed compliance tool that we have to watch the voter rolls. And the main reason for that is because we're checking to see if people have moved, if they've died, or if they've registered in another state. And we also give that information to both the local county officials as well as the citizens for free. We do ask for donations to help us out with voter rolls. Voter rolls are quite expensive in some states, like in the case of Alabama, with $40,000 just to ask for one instance of a voter roll. But that system is basically probably just a complete game changer, where you can click on a voter and you can immediately see now where they've moved to. We even have property data to see if they've now deeded a house in that new state. So you have proof beyond a shadow of a doubt that this person has been moved and needs to be removed from the voter rolls.
It's quite simple, but it's really quite brilliant. All you're doing here is taking the list of known individuals who have moved, registered in another state, and so on, and comparing it to the voter rolls. Of course, they make it as expensive as possible. Kris, if people want to find you and support your work, where can they go?
The easiest thing to do is come to our website at thepeoplesaudit.org. That's going to be the-peoples-audit.org. And there they'll find links to my Substack, my Telegram, and X, as well as we'll put some links out there to start inviting people to Ellie. Ellie right now is invitation only, but we're basically up to about 500 members from various states. It's just a lot of training to go into that system right away. So we want to make sure people get their hands held and know what to do when they're into that data, because it could be overwhelming.
All right. So here's the man with the plan, Kris Jurski, who's joined us. And I think we did a pretty good job here today of outlining the need for reform. It's still hard for me to believe that 6 years after the fact, 6 years after what I think was quite obviously the discrepancies, the anomalies, the outright fraud in the 2020 election, we're still arguing about this. But as you correctly point out, both parties seem to be in on it, at least in some states. And there's nobody else raising these questions. That's why it's up to citizens like Kris Jurski and the People's Audit